had a chance to meet most. All right, today I'm going to talk about illegal immigration and the modern-day Minuteman Project. So, I'm going to start out with a couple of questions. How many of you are aware that we have thousands of foreigners crossing our southern border on a daily basis? And some of you are completely unaware, or maybe you've heard something about it. Where did you hear that information? Did you hear it from the mainstream media? Did you hear it on the news? Did you hear it from somebody else? I heard it on TV. Okay. So, what did you hear about it? Did you hear stuff that made you think it was a good thing or a bad thing? A bad thing? Did anybody hear anything that made them think it might be a good thing? No? Okay, we have a really smart group here. There's certainly a lot of information out there in the newspapers, in the news, that might confuse you and might make you think that it's really a good thing and that it's in the nature of this country to allow people to just come on in however and whenever they please and do whatever they please. So you have a really good class here. Typically what you hear in the mainstream media, paying attention, if you hear anything at all, is that these people are coming here for a better way of life. And that might certainly be true. They certainly end up having some semblance of a way of life that's better than where they came from. Otherwise, they wouldn't be leaving, right? They wouldn't be staying. You might have heard them called undocumented immigrants. That's the current politically correct term for them. You may have even heard the idea that we're a nation of immigrants. And at the most extreme, you might have heard that they have the constitutional right to do what they're doing. And I think, maybe not for this class, but out there in the general public, there's a perception that these folks have a constitutional right to do what they're doing, to be here and to stay here, and if they are asked to leave, to have a judge and jury fight for them to actually stay here. So I want to dispel all of those myths by giving you some factual information. Now, this is information that's based on things that I have seen. In 2005, I went down to the border and saw what was actually going on. Following that, and at the time I lived in Boston, following that, I moved to Arizona and I lived there for 3.5 years. So I had a chance to spend a lot of time on the border and actually see what was going on. I spent time with residents who lived down there. I spent time with the ranchers. And I spent time touring the border, going over the lands. I spent time even being a so-called activist to try to start a solution to the process. And in the process of trying that, was actually turned back and pushed away by persons who are federal employees, namely folks who are high-ranking in our Customs and Border Patrol agencies. So I can tell you a little bit about that from personal experience. The threat from Mexico is very real and it's very immediate. It's amazing that we're dabbling in the Middle East, halfway around the world because of the presumed threat, but we have a very real and very immediate threat across our southern borders, namely Mexico. And we have literally millions of Mexicans fleeing to this country in an attempt to find freedom and opportunity and prosperity for themselves and for their family. So let me ask you, is Mexico devoid of natural resources? Is it devoid of people who are hardworking and presumably fairly intelligent? I don't think so. What they really lack is a government that's committed to this freedom and opportunity and prosperity for the common people that they're seeking here. In other words, they lack a constitution. Certainly, we're spending significant resources fighting a presumed threat across the world, wouldn't we want to spend at least some of those, maybe most of those, liberating Mexico and arguably solving the problem of illegal immigration? In my opinion, yes. It's subject to debate, and that's another conversation. But I think so. Offense would not necessarily solve the problem unless we have the political will to monitor it and keep it maintained and to constantly ensure that any threats that would cross it would be stopped right there. So it is an option, but it's not the best. Okay, so how many of you have heard about the Minuteman Project? And not the War for Independence type of Minuteman, but the one that took place about 6 years ago. Have any of you heard of that? A couple? Okay. Well, that was 6 years ago, and you're pretty young, so I didn't expect that I would get a show of hands, but I was very curious about how many of you would know about that. So let me tell you about the Minuteman Project. It was a call in 2005 to muster just common people from all over the country to go down to the border of Arizona to spotlight the problem of illegal immigration. It was organized by an ordinary man out of Southern California by the name of Jim Gilchrist, in concert with Chris Simcox, who lived in Arizona at the time, to assemble and exercise their First Amendment rights and to bring attention to what they knew was a national problem. And they knew that most of America was not in tune with this problem. It is not splashed across the headlines every day. Now, wouldn't you think that approximately 3 million foreigners crossing our southern border annually, and roughly since 1986, would be something that would be splashed across the headlines in a nation that's presumably acting as a sovereign nation? See, I would think so. But it was pretty quiet. I myself was not aware of this problem until I was personally impacted by it when I was living in East Boston. So that's an example of how this problem is pervasive throughout the entire country. And if you start researching it and digging into it, you will see the magnitude of the problem and the horrific impacts that it has presented to people in every state of this union. So, the muster happened in May of 2005, and the Minutemen, besides seeing the reality of the desperate situation that the residents of Arizona were faced with, they also discovered that there seemed to be a collective effort to keep quiet the actual situation and what was happening. Again, they saw for themselves that there's an issue, there's a big issue, and it was not being highlighted in the mainstream media. Most of those folks went on to dig further into the issue. I myself did discover the continuing impacts across the country and to really uncover why it was occurring. And it's like any issue that maybe brought you here, maybe brought some of the folks who are involved here. You enter into this movement, and then you dig through and say, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And you uncover a greater issue. And we've been talking about that all week. You know that New Hampshire representative, Mr. Tregenza, covered a little bit of that in his conspiracy class. But I can assure you that if you use this as evidence for that, that is certainly very close to reality, not completely another reality. So, the Minutemen were very carefully instructed. We are strictly a First Amendment group, abiding within our First Amendment rights to assemble and to speak freely about what is going on. We were, however, very carefully instructed to not do certain things that would defame what we were all about. I mean, we already had the negativity of the media looking at us, and they were looking for any movement that we might do wrong that would be construed as we were there to cause trouble, we were there to murder people coming into the country. Literally, we were there to do everything but just strictly sit there and spot people coming across the border and report them to the proper authorities, to the Border Patrol. So that was what this group was all about. They also, we stayed and operated within our Second Amendment rights and the local laws of Arizona at the time. So if anybody really just crossed the line and broke any of the strict rules that were put on us, they were asked to leave. And I saw that. So I know the matter of what was happening down there. So simply with a lawn chair and binoculars and a radio, and strict instructions and guidance from the local residents, 700 people from across the country were able to show that a simple presence on the border will stop the flow of people coming in. That's it. It's as simple as that. Yes, you can couple it with a little bit of technology, but strictly a presence will stop it. Now, has this, I'm going to rightly call it an invasion, continued to this day? And that was in 2005? I have to say yes. It was 6 years ago. And if you look, you dig deeply into what's happening at the border today, same situation, except it's actually gotten far worse. And I'm in contact with folks down on the border. We have emails to talk about the dangers and the realities they face on a daily basis, and it's horrific. And if you start digging into all the websites that are out there that discuss this problem in detail, you simply Google illegal immigration and find a slew of websites, you're going to see the enormity of the information that's out there. You're really going to start to see that there's a lot more under the surface that you're not being told. Let me ask you this. Campers all have access to the internet, right? Perhaps on a monitored basis. You can do a little research yourself. I have one friend who lives down in Sierra Vista, which is more or less a border town. It's at least where the illegal immigrants, we'll call them aliens because we're in the game of talking the right terminology here, where the illegal aliens cross through. And she has a website called Desert Visions, DESERT, Visions, all one word, .us. And you can see the photographs that she's taken of the impacts that these folks, when they're coming through, have made on the desert. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of acres of trash, inches knee deep and higher of trash of all kinds. And that's just the beginning of it. They're coming through, and they've severely impacted border residents' way of life. A lot of them have fled. They've fled from properties and ranches that have been in their families for generations. They're scared to death. They have their homes broken into. They have seen livestock killed, cars stolen. I mean, the list really goes on and on. Most recently, there was a murder which happened to make some of the news for a short period of time, and it was a murder of a rancher by the name of Bob Prince. He had a ranch down in Arizona and his family for generations. And he went out to help these folks because that's become one of his part-time hobbies. When these folks come through and they cross his ranch, he's very compassionate, and he's gone out there numerous times. He had gone out there numerous times to help these folks, and he was in the process of doing it again. And it's in retrospect, when they found his body, they put together the pieces of the puzzle that he was set up by an illegal alien who posed as someone who needed help, and another one became and shot him and ran back to Mexico. So that's the kind of thing that's happening around there. So I want to tell you a great lesson about what the Minuteman Project accomplished. It's really a lesson in the power of what a small, determined group of people can do. 700 people out of 300 million in this country. I mean, what's the percentage of that? I was going to do the math, but it's somewhere around 0.0001% of the population actually brought attention to this issue, to the nation. I mean, almost single-handedly. These folks down at the border were so happy to see people from all over the nation finally paying attention. And they were just so amazed, and just brought them a ray of hope. Well, it actually did that for a short time period. And if you hear about the issue of illegal immigration, we'll call it, that's what it's called generally, in the news, it's likely that it can be attributed to what the 700 folks down there did. The media was all over it. There was media from all over the world. And because of the attention that it garnered, the government had to react. They had to say something. They've been silent for so long. So, what did the government do? It sent a slew of Border Patrol agents and vehicles from all over the country to make a showing. I have pictures that show dozens of Border Patrol agent cars, more than these residents have ever seen in 2 decades, during the time period when the Minuteman Project lasted, which was for about 2 weeks, May of 2005. President Bush at the time came out and made a statement about these folks. He pretty much had to, and what did he do? What do you think that President George Bush said of the Minuteman at the time? Does anybody know, or can you guess what he might have said? Did he say, good job, thank you for letting us know? No. He called the Minuteman Project vigilantes, and it was not a compliment. It was meant to be a pejorative. It was meant to make a statement that these folks were troubled, and look, they're taking the law into their own hands. Well, they weren't really taking the law into their own hands, although they were operating within organic or constitutional law. We were operating within our First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble. But that was completely ignored. So, as I said, it didn't accomplish closure of the border. We still have a lot of these same issues down there, perhaps more than ever. The narcotic smuggling industry, trafficking has really grown since then, and the violence has grown. It just goes on and on and on. One of the things that you might hear about this issue in the mainstream news is that this is a victimless crime. So does it sound like it's a victimless crime? No, it's not. How about, are they coming for a better way of life? Well, yeah, presumably so. They're coming to a country which will, presumably allow them the freedoms and opportunities and prosperities that we've been able to gain through our Constitution. And while they're here, they take advantage of all the free handouts and social welfare programs that are openly made and freely made available to them. So when you look into this and you see the stories and the statistics of the bankrupted hospitals and the free rents and the free use of any medical facility and rental programs and so on, and you look and you see that these number in the hundreds of thousands, you see, wow, it's a great deal to come over here and gotten all this stuff for free. Why wouldn't they come, right? One of my arguments is that you take these free handouts away and they'll self-deport. And I've had this discussion with people who have studied this issue for years, and they agree that self-deportation is also a very effective way to have these folks leave. And they're no longer gaining the handouts, they're no longer welcome, and they're going to leave. this is Camp Constitution, I want to really address in more detail the constitutionality of this issue, because there are, believe it or not, many folks in this country who will still argue with you that they are here and they can partake of our constitutional rights. Well, that's simply not true. But you might need a little ammunition to counteract what those suppositions are. Most certainly our founding fathers would have considered this an invasion. There's simply no question about that. And I just want to preface this with saying that, really any look at the Constitution has to take into account the culture of the day. You have to recall that these men had just fought a bloody 7.5-year war, and their relatives paid a heavy price, and they had not forgotten the blood that was spilled on their behalf. So they knew, with all of their background and experience, including all the usurpations that they outlined in the Declaration of Independence that were being pushed on them by King George III, that there were certain people who were desirable and certain people who were undesirable to this country. Now, it was not simply based on race or country of origin or anything like that. It was simply based on character and principle. If you were willing to come here and roll up your sleeves and partake in their culture and show that you were a good citizen and you were capable of participating in a government with Republican principles, they wanted you here. King George III had been foisting a lot of the undesirables on the people in the colonies. He had been stopping people that they wanted to come here. So they clearly were not against people coming here, but they clearly articulated that they wanted people of good character. And you have to remember they were completely ensconced in a society where Judeo-Christian ethics were the norm of the day. So they completely understood that. In 1790, the House of Representatives was debating the rules, of naturalization. And at that time, the founders were articulating that there were certain kinds of people that were desirable for this country. And they said they were looking for people of merit, people with great moral character. And I quote from James Madison, who was speaking at the time of those debates. I should be exceedingly sorry if our rule of naturalization excluded a single person of good fame who really meant to incorporate himself into our society. On the other hand, I do not wish that any man should acquire the privilege, but who in fact is a real addition to the wealth or strength of the United States. Those are the kind of folks that they wanted. Now, if you look at our Constitution, he said that during the 1790s, in 1790, in a House of Representatives debate on the rules of naturalization. And I had gotten that from a lady who I highly respect as a constitutional expert. I couldn't find it on the internet. You might be able to find it. I tried for quite a long time. So, within the Constitution itself, you can see all kinds of articles and amendments that speak to this issue that clearly illustrate that they would be against what is happening today. I mean, it's in here. It's in the rule book. Our founding, and just, incidentally want to say that, really, this magnificent Constitution is the implementation manual for the Declaration of Independence. I hope you've all spent time studying the Declaration. I'd like to see us talk about it and study it quite a bit more. That was the mission statement. And to get a good look and a valid look and a comprehensive look at both these documents, you really have to read it in the culture of the day, and you really have to look at how they live. But within here, I'm going to show you right here in writing the principles and set forth in here the articles which would provide the basis to show that what I'm saying is absolutely true. In Article 1, Section 8, which you students know has set forth a very limited set of duties for Congress, the federal government, 18 and all, right? Within there is a duty by the federal government to provide for, calling for the militia to execute the laws of the Union and, among other things, repel invasions. This is truly an invasion, and any constitutional scholar will agree with that statement. And a topic for another day, but I just want to state this. There has not been a single militia in place for 100 years, which, incidentally, is not optional under this rule book. It's the duty of the Congress to have the militia of the several states. And what did Jen Coffey talk about yesterday? Which amendment did she focus on a lot? Second Amendment, right. And do you remember what the Second Amendment said? You already have it? You want to read it?
A well-regulated militia, no wait. Is that not correct? Well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of the free state, you know how I said that. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
That's right. Yes. You heard in that amendment the word necessary. Does that indicate it's optional to have a militia? No. That's the only that is the only place in the Constitution where you'll find the word necessary. Necessary to what?
Security.
To secure a free state. Does it make you a little nervous? You know that? That's another topic for another day, but the militia is made up of people 16 and 15, and the government that's in place is obligated to have those in place, and they do. It's not the National Guard, it's not the Army. Our founding fathers were afraid of standing armies. We have in place a rule in here that we should not have standing armies for more than 2 years. Just wanted to say that. All right. Article 4, Section 4. Anybody want to read that to me? Oh, yeah, I'll read it. I'm sorry. All right, I will read it. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and protect each of them against invasion. Is it doing that?
No.
Arizona recently tried to do something to enact legislation to at least help stem the flow in some manner, and they were stopped by the federal government. Under Amendment 10, states' rights, the states have an absolute right to protect themselves. And again, the federal government has not recognized their 10th Amendment rights. Amendment 14, that's been perverted under this whole issue as well. It speaks to citizenship. Well, have you all heard of anchor babies? Teresa? That's right. And do you think that's why they're doing it? Yes. Do you think that baby is actually under the Constitution a citizen of the United States?
They're born here to
No. Nope. The 14th Amendment has to do with persons who are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. If your parents are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, you yourself as their child are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So the concept of anchor babies is a fallacy. All right, is that clear?
What about the whole thing where like marrying someone who is already an American citizen? to become a
Yeah, I bet that
citizen.
comes under other statutory laws, and I guess I'm not really qualified to speak to those in length here. It's something to research and to look into, but I think you can follow, I would have to say just in general, I think you can follow a process to become a citizen under the guidelines provided under that. The recent Mexican president, the president before the current one, Calderon, I believe, Vicente Fox, outright said, "We are not going to stop," referring to this immigration, "until we convert the United States." He actually said that. And he definitely spoke out just a few years ago when one of our legislators, our federal legislators, said that we were going to build a fence. And he said, "You can't build a fence." So who is a Mexican president to be dictating American policy? Isn't that quite amazing? I have to say, if we're going to be a nation, we have to act like a nation. And our elected representatives have to stand up and speak out against these kinds of statements. Yeah.
Something I've been teaching people in our neck of the woods is that what they're trying to do is make us the chaotic states of the world,
Yes.
not the United States of America. When you become a naturalized citizen, I found the 1790 law that you quoted from doesn't have James Madison's background comment, but it does say that he is a person of good character and taking an oath of affirmation prescribed by law to support the Constitution of the United States. When you become a naturalized citizen, if you go through the citizenship process, you're supposed to learn how America operates and functions and works.
That's right.
You learn the value system of America. When you climb the fence or hop over the wall, and you're bringing another value system into the country, and when there are enough people here who act upon the values that make the third world, then America, the fabric of American society, becomes chaotic, like the rest of the world.
Right.
So when people are always trying to, Elena Kagan and other recent Supreme Court judges have said, we believe that world law should influence, or international law should influence American law, they're trying to make us the chaotic states of the world, as opposed to the United States of America.
That's right. That's
And
a
I
great
always
point.
challenge those people, why bother? Why don't you just go live, if you're so great in Europe, why don't you just go there? If you love it so much, I don't see you trying to move there. Why are you trying to bring us down to that chaotic level when you feel it's so great? Why don't you just go there if it's so wonderful?
That's right. And that gets into the why of what's happening. It certainly speaks to what's happening now when all these folks come in here and so rapidly and they're not assimilating. And I can dial my bank and I have to press 1 for English. Why do I have to do that? Isn't that the understood language of this country? Now you go to an ATM and you have 7 different languages that you have to pick from. Why aren't they assimilating into our culture? Well, I think I would propose that that's being done on purpose for a reason. To do this very thing, to blend other cultures and to dismiss and erase the very fabric that this nation was built on. That's what's going on. There's been no movement, no attempt by any of our representatives to actually stop it or mitigate it. You don't hear anything about it. Instead, they cover it up. You hear nothing in the news. You know, periodically, this issue will flame up in the news because something happened. We couldn't cover it up. Then it'll die down and go away, and everyone forgets, and they go on with their lives. Well, I would propose to you that this is a very significant issue. I mean, we've dealt with, we're all dealing with so many different, very significant issues, and it's right there in the mix. It's just as important. And I had made it a focus of my study and attention for several years, and I haven't seen it change in the least. So, with that said, I just want to end with a quote from Niccolo Machiavelli. This comes from The Prince, and by the way, I would suggest that as recommended reading for any of you. He understood the nature of what's happening now, and he said, when a newly acquired state has been accustomed, as I had said, to live under its own laws and in freedom, there are three methods whereby it may be held. The first is to destroy it, the second, to go and reside there in person, and the third, entrust its government basically to a few of the inhabitants who will be your friend. In other words, to take it over without a single shot fired. And that's what we're faced with today. So with that, I'm almost at my time. I'll take any questions. Niccolo, Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli. He wrote The Prince among other writers that I think he's best known for his verse. Okay, I have over here some photographs of what you see in the desert as a result of the crossings of the illegal aliens, in a newspaper from the time of the Minuteman Project. And you can feel free to take a look at those, and that's all.
What you're saying about like, the whole thing is that immigration isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as they're doing it legally, right?
Yeah.
So like, the only bad part about it is they're coming here and they're not like assimilating, like you said, and they're like taking like, all the free handouts that we're paying for, everything like that, but just so they're not like working hard to be an actual citizen is the problem.
That's right. We always had a process, and we were always to bring these folks in, and we were always very welcoming. It happened over decades. Suddenly, we have this out of control situation with folks just helping themselves coming across illegally. And I say that Mr. Wallace was right that it's absolute chaos.
Well, what's your take on the current issue of the Mexican drug gangs and the ATF gun running down around the border?
That's a good question. There's a lot of talk about that. It seems that there are some guns coming across, but I believe that it's been more or less been evidence that a lot of those guns originated from various factions within our government provided to those folks, and now they're coming back across. So they're not going that way.